Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-bum-bum. Hey everyone, it's Rabbi Kenneth Hahn for JUTV. This is Ask the Rabbi Thursdays, and I'm glad to be with you today. Today I'm talking about how Donald Trump fares on a Jewish ethics test. And why am I doing that today? Well, two very significant things happen in Washington today. Number one, of course, you're probably aware, the House voted by a razor-thin majority, consisting only of Republicans, as it happens, to overturn and repeal the Affordable Care Act. And the other thing that happened today is President Trump signed an executive order basically asking the IRS to use much greater discretion in going after religious organizations and religious members of the clergy who engage in political speech and specifically advocate for, or I suppose have bad things to say about political candidates and political figures. So I'm taking full advantage of that signed executive order to engage in some analysis of how President Trump, as I say, has been doing on vis-a-vis a Jewish ethics test. Why is this up for me today? Well, normally I leave the analysis of the Torah to my colleagues who speak on Wisdom Wednesdays, who give wonderful divrei Torah, or words of Torah, about the week's parsha or Torah portion. But I was reading this week's Torah portion, and I was kind of dumbstruck by what I read in there and how it relates to the behavior of Donald Trump. So I really wanted to talk about this. This week's Torah portion is actually a double. There are actually 54 Torah portions in the year, which means at a minimum we'd have to double up twice because they're read on a weekly basis. And as it happens, they double up even more than that, parenthetically, because during some Jewish holidays you have special readings of the Torah and so on. So this week there's a Torah portion called Acharei Mot, and there's something I want to say that relates to that one. And then there's Kiddushim, which is about holiness, and I want to say a lot about that one. So as far as Acharei Mot is concerned, that is the Torah portion where we get the concept, or from which we get the concept of the scapegoat. It's in that Torah portion that the high priest selects two goats, and one the priest offers up to God for slaughter, for sacrifice on behalf of the people. And the other one, onto the other one, the priest casts all the sins of the community and then sends that goat off to die in the wilderness. And there's lots of story about that, which we don't need to get into. But I'm very aware that through the election cycle we finished not that long ago, and even today, in the first 100+ days of the Trump presidency, there are several groups that have been scapegoated in the United States. And scapegoating meaning being blamed for something for which you are not responsible. And this is a position that Jews, of course, have occupied countless times over the centuries. Being blamed for the Black Death and many, many other things. I talked about the attitudes associated with anti-Semitism last week, and many of those attitudes have to do with blaming Jews for things that, one anti-Semitic attitude, for example, is that Jews are responsible for all the wars on the planet. So I'm very aware that there's been a lot of scapegoating, particularly in recent days, of the Muslim community in the United States, being accused of all kinds of things that they're just not the least bit guilty for, and certainly not collectively guilty for. And of course, immigrants have been scapegoated in all kinds of ways for things like job loss, which we know is much more related to automation and globalization than anything else. So good luck getting those jobs back, even if you build a wall. So there's been a lot of scapegoating going on. But then we get to this other parsha this week, which Kiddushim, and the rabbis and Moses Maimonides, also known as Rambam, went through the Torah in kind of picked out 613 mitzvot, or basically sacred obligations that an adult Jewish person is responsible for engaging in. And again, there are 54 Torah reading sections in the Torah, right? And this week in Kiddushim, that one alone contains 51 of the 613. So it's really about holiness and about being holy. And I was reading through the list, and thematically certain things kind of started to emerge. So this is not an exhaustive list, even in terms of theme, but it is an extensive list in terms of what's covered this week. And again, Kiddushim is about being holy, and it's being holy in a very particular context, which is, again, in my view of things, we as a species fell from grace in our creation story, that is the Garden of Eden, and having fallen from grace, we are now trying to get back into a graceful situation, which we call the Promised Land. And to do that in the Jewish context, in no small way, entails creating a just community, in acting in a holy way as an individual to make that just community a greater possibility, a greater reality. And we speak of the concept of tikkun olam, or repairing the world, so we can get to that place of a really better, if not perfect, community. And so we are very concerned with ethics and the relationships and relations among people and how we should act. And this Torah portion this week, Kiddushim, delineates many of the ways we should act. So what are they? Some of them have to do with proper sexual relations. Okay? We know, of course, there's the whole issue now with what is fake news and what are true facts and alternative facts and so on and so forth. But, you know, we certainly had Donald Trump on video talking about his attitudes towards women. So didn't do too well there. This week's Torah portion talks extensively about proper etiquette in business, in conducting oneself ethically in business. And certain things we're told not to do are we're not to use weights and measures that are inaccurate. And there are many, many ones that relate to the theme of doing right in business. And we know that our president, as a businessman, was involved in countless lawsuits with people who clearly feel like they had been cheated by him. Trump University being only one example. As it happens, anecdotally, my father-in-law, who lives in the Philadelphia area, knows business people who were, contracted with by the Trump organization for, when the casinos were being constructed, so on and so forth, and to this day they haven't been paid. Speaking of which, another very clearly delineated ethical practice in this week's Torah portion is never to withhold wages from people, to always pay people on time. Doesn't do so well with that one. We're also told not to speak derogatorily of other people. And we know countless tweets and statements to the contrary coming from our president. Finally, I'll just mention there are a number of mitzvot, or sacred obligations, that have to do with charitable work. This is the Torah portion where we're told to leave the corners of our fields unharvested, so that poor people who don't have access to food in any other way can come on our land and actually take the crops that we have grown, because it's our obligation to support people who cannot support themselves. So, there was clearly all that news that came out about the practices of the Trump Foundation, which ultimately was shut down. And of course, today we see the Republicans under at the behest of our president, passing legislation that I can't even imagine they're familiar with because it was only printed last night, that hasn't been scored by the Congressional Budget Office, so we have no idea what it's going to cost, how many people are going to lose insurance or anything like that. And they're passing it anyway because for political expediency. And it's pretty clear, based on the provisions in this bill, that many people, particularly people who have pre-existing medical conditions, will not be able to get insurance or will have to pay a lot for it. And to think that the $8 billion allocated in this bill over 5 years to subsidize the high-risk pools of states is going to come close to getting the job done in terms of stabilizing those high-risk pools, I think is well, there's not too much to say about it. So the final thing I want to leave with you is Kiddushim is also the source of the great statement, love thy neighbor as thyself, love the other person as thyself, which Rabbi Akiva called the central tenet of Judaism, and of course Hillel, the elder, the rabbi, said, when debating how to present Judaism with Shammai, another great rabbi of the time, and we know the story, he said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, essentially, which he said to a man who wanted to know about Judaism while standing on one foot. Go and study. The rest is commentary, go and study. So this is the Torah portion where we talk about loving thy neighbor as thyself. And it's quite clear that our president has great love for himself. I don't know of anyone who has more buildings in the world with his name on it. I'm not clear that he loves his neighbor as much as he loves himself. So when I think about how our president does on a Jewish ethics test, at least as the questions would be delineated based on this week's Torah portion, Kiddushim, which is all about holiness, I regret to say I'd have to give him a failing grade. So that's it for Ask the Rabbi this week. This has been Rabbi Kenneth Hahn, speaking with the freedom afforded me by our president, who is signing executive orders encouraging clergy to support political candidates, or the contrary, I suppose. And if you like this, please feel free to share it with friends, and tune in again to JUTV next Monday for Music Monday. Lehitraot. See you soon. Bye-bye.